stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe. It's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will these vitamin supplements turn the color of my urine to a deep forest green? And do air conditioning units emit bacteria harmful to my pet llama? And now, the podcast host whose swimwear can only be described as mildly European, Pete Dominic.
Yes, that is me. You nailed me again, sir. Thank you very much. As always, Pete Co. Thank you to John Carroll for writing the theme song, the intro and outro song for this podcast. It's available for everybody July 1st. Also, July 26th, I will be in Boston with J. Al Covan. Get your tickets now. I'll link to that show in the show notes. And what else can I tell you? Thursday night, our hangout, as always, Thursday at 8 o'clock. Two excellent guests joining me on today's podcast for the first time ever. Legal analyst, former Department of Justice prosecutor Elie Honig joins me to talk about his new book, Hatchet Man, How Bill Barr Broke the Prosecutor's Code and Corrupted the Justice Department, as well as the executive director, former executive director and founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, now president of Righteous Media, host of Independent Americans, Paul Rieckhoff, joins me for another wide-ranging, thoughtful discussion and argument. We always argue. It's always great. Paul Rieckhoff, Elie Honig, and you. Thank you very much for joining me here. Sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't already. Go now to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I cannot do it without you, so keep the subscriptions up. I appreciate it very, very much so that I can put this show together each and every day. Unfortunately, yesterday I had, in the earlier part of the day, if you listen to the show, I replaced it around a little after noon. But I did have some issue with with the levels from yesterday's show. But as I told everybody on the Discord platform, which is also available to folks 24/7 if you are a subscriber, I said on Discord, hey guys, I've heard from several listeners today that my levels are off on episode 380 with Sarah Kendzior. I've spoken to young Keith, my fake producer. He is, of course, to blame. I want you to know he has agreed to wear a shock collar, which is attached to an app on my phone. He's also agreed to allow me to shock him for every righteous complaint, and I hope he learns his lesson. So, my apologies for the technical mistake, and be sure that Keith is being punished, folks. All right, so lots to get to on today's show. I try to do the news Monday through Thursday here at the opening. Try to cover as much news that I can that happened the day before. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the last 24. All right, what I will say is the two big stories from yesterday continue to be, of course, the horrific scene in South Florida where at least 150 are still missing. The death count continues to rise slowly. But the headline at Drudge Report is Beach Building Turns Mass Grave, Questions Mount. Skirted local codes with penthouse. And so following that, obviously, closely, and terrible situation down there. And also, of course, the record-breaking heat in the Pacific Northwest. All records smash. Portland to 114 degrees. Roads buckling in Seattle. A once-in-a-millennium historic heat wave peaking today. Yesterday, I should say, British Columbia at 116 degrees. And here is a montage of local news reports from, I think, the Portland area mostly, just describing what it's like.
You didn't have to go far in Portland to find people impacted by this record-breaking heat. We met Wendy checking into the Crystal Hotel downtown.
I'm here because we don't have air conditioning and it's so hot and we wanted to give our dog a chance to cool off.
She said paying for a two-night stay was way less costly than buying an AC unit.
These are the lines to check in at the DoubleTree near SeaTac on Saturday. And a search for a hotel in Seattle this weekend through Monday shows room after room sold out.
On that same block, Zeus Cafe also had to close early.
Mainly for the safety of my staff, so we want to make sure that we only have minimal equipment running.
Lots of other places had to close too. The Oregon Zoo shut down at 12:30 Sunday because a it's too hot for the animals and customers. It'll close early Monday, too.
TriMet has suspended all MAX services until tomorrow morning because of the heat.
We also know that the Portland streetcar is going to be out of commission until Tuesday as well. You can see this picture, how the cable melted from the record-breaking heat we had on Sunday and will continue to have today.
All right. Tough news coming out from out west. The temperatures there, if you're out there, definitely would love to hear from you. If you want to reach out and describe what the situation is. I know a lot of people don't have air conditioners there because it's generally a more temperate atmosphere. Got a lot of listeners up that way and would love to hear from you. I hope you're okay. Here is the governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee, talking with Chris Hayes on MSNBC about the record-breaking heat wave, which, of course, is exacerbated by Earth-wide climate change.
Well, I think some people think, well, we'll just strap on a few more air conditioners and we'll be fine. Doesn't work. Our grid system's now being shut down in places because of this excess of heat. I just got a notice from one of my utilities in Spokane that 8,000 people have been cut out from electricity. The air conditioner is not doing them any good right now. We, of course, have done the cooling centers as much as humanly possible. We have shared information with our citizens about heat stroke and how to recognize it and what to do about it. But we've got to recognize we were not built for this heat bomb. Climate change has dropped a heat bomb on the Pacific Northwest. We're called the Evergreen State for a reason. It's moderate, it's cool, it drizzles quite often. We were not meant for this. And so you have a whole infrastructure, a whole economy, a whole culture built on moderate temperatures. So this is very dangerous. And you got to understand there's a lot of people can't avoid this. They work outside. Some of us get to work inside where we do have air conditioners. But our whole society is built on our agricultural industry, our construction industry, and being able to work outside. We are not prepared for that. So right now, what we're seeing is the harbinger of a future that is now upon us. And, I'll be talking to the president Wednesday about our forest fire threats that are just beginning to heat up. And we know that the most important issue in America today is our ability for Congress to pass robust, comprehensive, aggressive climate change legislation, which won't happen unless we get this reconciliation bill through.
All right, there is Jay Inslee of the state of Washington making a lot of good points, and I actually wish he had done better or even won. I think he would have been a great president out there, but laying it out for us. And now let me move on to another serious issue. Of course, COVID-19. I got one clip for you on this, and guess what? It's Senate Minority Leader and giant asshole Mitch McConnell. But he is good on promoting the vaccines. He never wavers because he himself is a victim of polio. And yesterday he was asked about by a reporter who you can, I think, hear just barely hear, but then you can hear Turtle very well. And he says, I think, all the right things. Here it is from yesterday.
So COVID-19 cases, they're rising among unvaccinated Americans. We know a lot of those folks are white Republican males. What would you say to those people who are not taking the shot?
Take it. I'm a big fan of vaccines. As a few of you know, I was a polio victim when I was a kid. It took 70 years to develop a polio vaccine, 2 of them that worked. Our country, as a result of the CARES Act and the $50 billion we put into Operation Warp Speed, developed not 1, not 2, but 3 highly effective vaccines in less than a year. It was a modern medical miracle. That doesn't work if people don't get vaccinated. So for whatever influence I can have over those decisions, I want to encourage everyone to get the vaccine. Thank you.
It doesn't work if people don't get the vaccine, right? Everybody should get vaccinated, and then I don't know what else to tell you. Mitch McConnell yesterday. And here is President Biden in the Oval Office. He was visiting with the Israeli president, giving him his assurances that if there wasn't an Israel, we'd invent an Israel. That's how much we love Israel. He actually really said that. I'm paraphrasing. But he also said he's never going to let Iran get a nuclear weapon, and he defended his right to launch missiles into Syria, which I talked with Paul Rieckhoff about today. Here he is.
And today we're going to be discussing a broad range of challenges, including Iran. What I can say to you, Iran will never get a nuclear weapon on my watch, as they say. I directed last night's airstrikes targeting sites used by the Iranian-backed militia groups responsible for recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq. And I have that authority under Article 2, and even those up in the Hill who are reluctant to acknowledge that have acknowledged that's the case.
I'm not so sure that they have acknowledged that that's the case. I would beg to differ on that, but I don't want to get bogged down. It's the last 24. A few more things I want to play for you, including Fox News' Peter Doocy, who just must be addicted to getting dunked on by President Biden. Spokeswoman Jen Psaki. I don't think I need to set this one up. It's all there.
This weekend, Gwen Berry, who hopes to represent the United States as an Olympian on the hammer throwing events, won a bronze medal at the trials, and then she turned her back on the flag while the anthem played. Does President Biden think that is appropriate behavior for someone who hopes to represent Team USA?
Well, Peter, I haven't spoken to the president specifically about this, but I know he's incredibly proud to be an American and has great respect for the anthem and all that it represents, especially for our men and women serving in uniform all around the world. He would also say, of course, that part of that pride in our country means recognizing there are moments where we are, as a country, haven't lived up to our highest ideals. And it means respecting the right of people granted to them in the Constitution to peacefully protest.
Peacefully protest. I think I cut her off there, but she cut him off as well. That guy just keeps trying to get through, and she handles him pretty well every time. I think, get the fuck out of here. I think she's going to fall for that horse shit question. Okay. Also yesterday, former President Obama got together, teamed up with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, former Attorney General Eric Holder, for his first fundraising call since the 2020 election, to call for support for the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, which organized the call. And I've got a couple clips from that. Here is former President Obama.
As I argued before the vote on Senate Bill 1 as amended by Joe Manchin, I didn't think that was shouldn't have been a particularly controversial bill. It was one in which Joe Manchin went out of his way to try to find compromise with Republicans. I think it is entirely appropriate for Republicans to say that we want to scrutinize every aspect of this bill. We have our own proposals to make sure that elections are fair. We're not going to just trust that the Democrats have our interests at heart in this. I think that's entirely appropriate. What you can't do, what the Republicans can't with a straight face claim, is that after we saw January 6th, after you justified what culminated in January 6th by suggesting that, our voters don't feel like this vote is legitimate and we think there are all these questions that have to be answered and we're suspicious, et cetera. Well, you can't then say, all right, well, let's do something about it. And then they say, no, we don't want to talk anything about that. That can't be right. And what we can't also allow Republicans to say is the only kind of voting we think is fair is when our voters, or who we think are our voters, are allowed to vote, and those who we think are not going to vote for us are not allowed to vote. That also can't be the answer. That can't be fair. We have to challenge that basic premise, and we have to publicize and make sure that the American people understand the stakes. You guys are helping us do that. I'm grateful for you, and I will do anything I can.
All right, I cut him off. He was still talking. Sorry, Mr. President. Let's hear from his former Attorney General, Eric Holder, who was on the same call, talking about the same challenge.
And here's the bottom line. We're in, and I don't say this light. I mean, I don't say this light, but I think it's accurate. We're in the midst of an attack on our democracy not seen since the Jim Crow era. And we got to fight back. Now, the NDRC, we're doing our part to create, a level playing field, to take the power of redistricting out of the hands of politicians, so that our elections can be based on, who has the best ideas and not who was in charge of drawing the lines. Over the last few years, we've brought racial gerrymandering claims in the federal courts. We've brought partisan gerrymandering cases in the state courts to push back against blatant efforts to disenfranchise, our fellow Americans. We've supported reform efforts on ballots and in state legislatures to create independent, citizen-led redistricting commissions. We've been successful in a number of states there. And we've also endorsed and invested in candidates committed to fairness, building support for our cause, from the ground up. Now, that work has brought results. Since we launched in 2017, we've broken Republican trifecta control in 9 states, including crucial states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. We've supported 7 winning state Supreme Court candidates in Michigan, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Ohio. As we bring cases in these state systems, those people are extremely important.
A lot of work to be done by those 2 men and so many more grassroots supporters that got to help. The voting rights bill, which Democrats, of course, unanimously supported and Republicans unanimously opposed, failed in a 50-50 procedural vote, even though those Democrats represent millions and millions more than the Republicans do. It failed because the Senate fails and it's a stupid, broken institution. Because they need 60 vote majority to overcome the stupid filibuster, only in America, folks. Another Democratic-led voting rights bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, still alive in Congress, has better chances at achieving bipartisan support. But now Congress seems to move its attention towards infrastructure and jobs. So we'll see what is happening. But President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder trying to bring the attention back to voting rights and painting a stark picture of American democracy if we don't have federal legislation on the matter. All right, so also want to play for you former Senator from Florida and now NASA Administrator Bill Nelson on his thoughts on aliens. I thought this is kind of a weird guy, weird clip.
Ever since that video from the Navy pilots came out, people are hungry to know. And of course, ever since Star Trek, people are yearning to find out what's out there in the cosmos. Are we alone? Personally, I don't think we are. The universe is so big. It's 13.5 billion years ago is when the universe started. That's pretty big. So, but people are hungry for this kind of information, and we're going to keep searching.
Well, that's true. I mean, the universe is pretty big. Thank you, sir. If you're interested in aliens, and even mildly, like I am, kind of mildly, there's a comprehensive article written about all of the questions and all the experts and talking about all of it by Gideon Lewis Krauss in the New Yorker magazine titled How the Pentagon Started Taking UFOs Seriously. I highly recommend it, and you can also listen to it at the New Yorker website. So you can thank me later for that one. All right, now I want to go back to MSNBC, where Chris Hayes had Elie Mystal on. He, of course, is legal correspondent for The Nation magazine. And friend of mine, love Elie. It's been hard to get him back on the show. He's super busy and in high demand, but it'll happen soon. And he was on MSNBC last night talking about this whole fiasco about Bill Barr. I'll touch on that. Talk a lot about it with my first guest, Elie Honig. Here is Elie Mystal. 2 Ellies in the same sentence? How is that possible?
Look, I need to know where Republicans go to launder their reputations, because they need to open a dry cleaners, right? Because I can't get my shirts nearly that starchy as what these Republicans are able to do with their reputations. Bill Barr suppressed the Mueller report, likely clearing Trump of an impeachment conviction for the Russia scandal. He launched an investigation at Trump's behest into Trump's political rivals, then wouldn't tell people about it, likely helping Trump dodge yet another potential impeachment conviction. And as you just played, he was Mr. There could be voter suppression right up until he wasn't. He wants credit for this. This is like giving Robert E. Lee credit for breaking with rebel President Jefferson Davis after Appomattox. No. We have to look at everything that Barr did leading up to that point to judge him fairly. And if you do that, what you see is Trump's #1 henchman, not a person with the moral rectitude to stand up to a corrupt and illegal president.
There's just almost nobody better at being a commentator and an analyst than Elie Mystal. He's brilliant. He's hilarious. He's fearless. Love that guy and always want to play him for you here on this show anytime I see him talking. A guy I don't ever really want to play, but I just am like, you know what, screw it, is Donald Trump Jr. Almost never play him, but everybody was flipping out last night on Twitter because Don Jr. made this video in like his kitchen and people were legit worried about him being drunk or on drugs, or I don't know what the hell was going on. He looked really weird. He sounded really weird, as usual. This is like 20 seconds. It's kind of worth it.
Be like, I don't think Joe's smart enough to be like, hey, let's send him off the trail. Don't hack the McDonald's on D.C. I mean, why doesn't he just give Putin, like, I don't know, the keys to the nuclear football? What's the list? Don't hack 1, Joe's basement. 2, Hunter's businesses. 3, Hunter's laptop. 10% for the big guy. 4, don't hack that. What's going on?
What's going on is the question everybody was asking last night on Twitter. People were simply saying this guy is in trouble. This guy needs an intervention. Something is wrong here. Does there need to be an intervention? I mean, comment after comment like that. Anyway, all right, that's it. That's the last 24 in terms of sound that I've got for you. Now it's time for everything else. Headlines, rapid fire, the news dump.
Farmer has his rooster and the cock can't get it up. He's feeding him Cialis on today's news dump.
Wow, the rooster is impotent and needs boner pills. From the amazing mind of Pete Coe, another brilliant news dump jingle. Okay, let's start online, where a major controversy broke out when YouTube decided to take down the account of a long-time kind of news analysis or watchdog website called Right Wing Watch. I've referenced it many times in my prep and my research. It's run by a group called the People for the American Way, and YouTube reconsidered deleting Right Wing Watch, this account, because this account had chronicled years and years and years of far-right extremism, often stuff you won't see anywhere else. We got so much sound from like these crazy preachers and so many other nut jobs from that website. And for some reason, YouTube took it down. I'm not quite sure why, but they reinstated it. And upon reinstatement, Right Wing Watch said, We're glad that by reinstating our account, YouTube recognizes our position that there's a world of difference between reporting on offensive activities and committing them, they said in a statement on their website. So people were outraged by that, and that site is now back up, thankfully, because they do good work. The Supreme Court sided with a transgender student on the issue of which bathroom the transgender student wants to use. A transgender man from Virginia won a years-long legal battle against his former high school over its refusal to let him use the boys' bathroom when he was a student. The Supreme Court rejected the Gloucester County School Board's appeal of a lower court decision that found its transgender bathroom ban is unconstitutional. Major victory for this young man whose name is Gavin Grimm, and a hero for the transgender rights movement. So that's pretty great news. This is always such a manufactured issue, by the way. I mean, I tweeted about that story yesterday, and I just said, when my wife, when we go to places, concerts, different places where there's a lot of people, games, professional sports games, or whatever it is, and there's a long line at the women's room, my wife just goes right in the men's room. Like, nobody cares, by the way. I mean, if you're uncomfortable with that, I don't know. I mean, it's the bathroom. Nobody's talking to anybody in there. It's such a manufactured thing. And the Supreme Court got another one right, so that's great. The Disney Cruise Line said Monday that it would delay its first test cruise since the COVID-19 pandemic shuttered the industry after a number of participants had inconsistent test results for the coronavirus. When reached out for comment on the story, Mickey Mouse said,
I think we got a little ahead of ourselves on this, and we just have to wait a little bit more. Got to be a little bit more patient, Unfortunately, Minnie is never patient with me, and that's a whole nother story. I shouldn't get personal right now.
Yeah, I did it. I did full Mickey for you, because I'm committed. Thank you. Please consider a subscription to this genius of a podcast. We got weed news, cannabis news. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas said that federal marijuana laws, quote, may no longer be necessary due to the large number of federal policies that have greatly undermined its reasoning. I feel like that's a major development, although I'll have to ask Siegel or other con law experts. But I think that's movement. That's progress from a guy who doesn't do movement very well, Justice Thomas. And speaking of progress, the governor of Louisiana signed a law ending sales tax on diapers, tampons, and other hygiene products because some of that is sexist. I mean, you can't have taxes on tampons. Men don't need tampons, and they should be free everywhere in public as well. I remember doing a segment about that. There was an organization trying to support that movement when I was back in the old days. So that's good news. No sign that gas prices are going to be going down anytime soon. After a brief dip, gas prices in the U.S. on the rise again. The U.S. average price for a gallon of gas rose 2.5 cents from last week to $3.09 per gallon on Monday, according to the travel and fuel price tracking app Gas Buddy, which is also the nickname of a good buddy of mine from high school that had gastrointestinal issues. Hey, Gas Buddy. Sorry. I like this headline. It makes me feel like I'm a good parent for learning this years ago, before I even had kids. Physical punishment does not appear to improve a child's positive behavior or social competence over time, according to a review of 69 studies from U.S., Canada, China, Colombia, Greece, Japan, Switzerland, Turkey, United Kingdom. How about that? Spanking can worsen a child's behavior and do real harm, according to this study. Yes. How about this one? E-cigarette company Juul Labs will pay $40 million and make changes to its business practices to settle the first state lawsuit that alleged it marketed to teens. North Carolina attorneys announcing on Monday. That's probably the first of many state lawsuits against that company that definitely marketed to teens. I think they marketed so hard they told teens how to use a Juul in the classroom and not get caught, according to my daughters reporting and narking on their friends or classmates. The fourth tropical named storm of the 2021 season and second to impact the United States is on its way. Tropical Depression 4 formed Monday off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. 4 is forecast to make landfall as Tropical Storm Danny. And apparently the weather does not look great for the 4th of July in a lot of different parts of the country. So if you got plans, check the forecast. And that is what I'm here to tell you. And that is today's news dump. How about it? Thank you. All right. Well, let's get to my guests. Coming up, the great Paul Rieckhoff. You do not want to miss my conversation with Paul today. We have a long argument about war and peace and politics and Republicans versus Democrats when it comes to these wars and veterans issues, and it was really great. I always love talking to Paul, and I never mind arguing with him, and would love to know what you think about that. That is coming up. But first, I've got a first-timer on Stand Up today. I'm very excited to have him joining me for the first time. He's got a brand new book that is just out and available. It's called Hatchet Man. It is out July 6th, actually, but you can pre-order it now. Hatchet Man, How Bill Barr Broke the Prosecutor's Code and Corrupted the Justice Department. You know him from his regular appearances on CNN over the past several years, where he's a legal analyst, and he is a former federal prosecutor and state prosecutor. He is on Twitter at Elie Honig, Honig. Really enjoyed talking with him. I think you will too. You're going to love the book. Here it is now, my conversation with Elie Honig about Bill Barr, his new book, and much, much more. All right, I've told you all about him, and I've got him now. You've seen him on your TV, and here he is on a much larger platform. You must be nervous to join me. Elie Honig, thank you so much. Psyched to have you on the podcast.
P, I'm thrilled to be with you. I listen to your stuff. I'm kind of, there's some things I feel confident I can do, and there's some things I am terrified of, and I'm in awe of anyone who can do it, and stand up is in that category. Like, I see people do it, and I just go, how do they do that? That is the scariest thing on the planet. I would never try that in a million years.
Yeah, so. You say that, but you're a prosecutor. I mean, I usually I'll push back on people and be like, well, yes, it's a hard thing to do, and I'm very brave. But I mean, you open your book, which we're going to talk about, talking about like your first case, and just reading that, I actually shit myself. So I'm not sure that's fair for you to say. You had a lot more to lose than I do.
True. Yeah, no, that is how I felt doing my first case as well, as I lay out in the book.
Well,
so,
you know what? I say you had a lot more to lose than I do, but you make a good point at the beginning of your book that your mentor said it's not about winning and losing. Can we just tell me about that real quick before we get to this?
Yeah, it's one of the lessons that I learned and I talk about in the book. The first case I ever tried was, as you say, I sort of lay out how terrifying it was for me to, at 29 years old, which I guess that's closer now to my kid's age than to my current age. But standing up in front of a real jury in Manhattan in a big, fancy federal courtroom and making an argument and then getting a verdict, right? They come out. It's just like in TV. And how do you find guilty? And we got sort of I guess not too much of a spoiler, but we got a split verdict in the case. Guilty on one count, not guilty on the other. And I said to my supervisor, who had been in the office for a long time and was very experienced, I said, what was that? Was that a win or a loss? And he sort of snapped at me appropriately. And he said, look, he said, this isn't the National Football League. We don't do wins and losses. This isn't about your stats. This is about being part of the system. This is about having a little bit of humility. And I think that's a very important lesson that I learned early on and tried to incorporate and sort of comes up throughout the book.
Yeah, but that being said, I heard so many prosecutors talk about, or critics of prosecutors, lawyers saying that prosecutors don't take cases that they can't win because of the politics of it all. You actually, your mentor says that. He sounds like a straight-laced guy, but I've heard so many people say it really does matter if you win or lose, if you want to get promoted. So where is the truth on that?
Well, that's interesting. Let me say this. No prosecutor wants to lose. It's a good thing, I think, that prosecutors will only charge cases that they really believe in, right? Because we could willy-nilly charge. You can charge, the old saying, a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that, right? Like I used to say, let's actually try to indict a ham sandwich and see what happens. Like I'm 90% sure I could have convinced a grand jury, United States v. ham sandwich. But it's a good thing. It's a good part of our system that prosecutors won't charge a case until they're confident they can stand up in front of a jury and argue it. Most trials end up in convictions, the 80%, maybe a little more, a little less, depending on jurisdiction. I've lost a couple. I talk about some of them in the book. It sucks. It's crushing. But you have to recognize, and look, if you lose 8 in a row or 4 out of 5, someone's going to ask, is this guy doing something wrong? Thankfully, I never had that. But you learn that just as a win isn't because you're awesome, a loss isn't necessarily because you suck. So again, it's really the same point that it's about the system. It's not about you.
I want to get more into the book so much. It's really important and almost a history book of sorts, but written by an expert, a legal expert about Bill Barr. But let's just talk about kind of the news that came out, which apparently the universe is coming together for your book release. I mean, you write this book about how Bill Barr broke the Justice Department, basically, and then we hear news of how Bill Barr conducted himself post-election, which is new news, I guess, coming out from some new reporting. But let's talk about that. I mean, you were on CNN yesterday. I used the clip of you, which is why I was like, I got to talk to this guy. I want to interview him. Of you basically saying Bill Barr is on reputation damage control. And I really love what you said. You said, no. Too late. This guy did so many things wrong. He doesn't get to do that, basically. So what's going on right now with Bill Barr and this news and what his response was?
Yeah, so forget about the Foo Fighters. This is the biggest tour of the summer of 2021. This is the Bill Barr image rehabilitation tour. And by the way, I don't know this. Well, I'll tell you what I do know and what I don't know. Okay. I do know that Bill Barr knows my book is coming. I do know for a fact that he's pissed and worried about it. Good. I do know for a fact that I asked him through his people, his reps twice. I said, hey, I'm writing a book about Bill Barr, about the Attorney General. It's going to be very critical. I would love a chance to sit with him and hear his side of the story and talk with him, interview him. No response. I didn't even get a no. I just got ignored. So I do know all of those things. Now,
do you know him? Have you met him?
No, never met the guy. Don't know him. The people I do know who know him have always said, someone said to me recently, I dealt with him a few times. He seemed fine. I said, yeah, I'm not saying he's a horrible guy to hang out with. I'm not saying he's a jerk. I'm saying he was terrible and corrupt at his job. You can be a perfectly decent guy, decent guy to hang with.
I'll say that. I'm not you. So yeah. I'll say that. I think that as you talk about his culture warrior views, I have problems. I can't
I agree.
Deal with that kind of stuff. I think that makes for a bad person. But I have a much lower threshold and a better, a shittier handle on language than you do. So,
so here's the recent news. So yesterday, a news story comes out where Bill Barr has done an interview just, recently, where he talks all about how after the election in December, he came out and said, and we knew that he did this publicly. He came out in December and said, there's no evidence. We've not found any evidence of election fraud. And this whole piece is like Bill Barr telling this tale of glory, how he stood up to Trump. It's like the way a kid would come home from summer camp in the old days, you and me age, and tell his friends about how great he was at camp, right? It's like the most self-serving, self-aggrandizing bunch of BS ever, how he really stuck it to Trump and said, but here's the thing that's unbelievable. I read this and I went crazy. The story makes no mention of the fact that Bill Barr, for months before the election, was one of the main people fanning the flames of the big lie. Let me give you 2 quick examples, Peter. 3. He did an interview with NPR, Bill Barr, and he said there's all this potential for fraud and there's nothing we can do to stop it. It's out of control. NPR, poor NPR, had to issue a correction after the fact, and they wrote an article entitled something like "We Let the United States Attorney General Tell Lies." They in the take back article they quoted experts who called what Bill Barr said about election fraud, and I quote, preposterous, false, and a quote, nuts. So that's one. Then he goes in front of Congress. He does the same thing. Big risk of election fraud. And when he gets asked, what's your evidence? He goes, none but common sense. Yeah. I mean, come on. Yeah. All right. I mean, if it's common sense, it should be the easiest thing to prove. And then he comes on here with CNN with Bill Barr, and he tells this story. This time he was ready. He knew Wolf was going to ask him this, about election fraud. And Bill Barr goes, well, Wolf, we indicted a case with 1,700 fraudulent ballots down in Texas. Now, I'm watching this. I'm going, oh, well, okay, that's substantial. He's got something there. Turns out, again, DOJ this time has to issue a correction that the next day. It wasn't first of all, it wasn't DOJ. It was state prosecutors in Texas. But it didn't involve 1,700 false ballots. It involved one. A single false ballot, one. So this is what Bill Barr was doing. I mean, it's like, if you sit there and you light the twigs and you fan the campfire and then it starts roaring and then you come in later and you take a leak on it, you don't get any credit. Perfect. You've already done the damage, right? Perfect. By the way, I wanted to say that this morning I was on with Maggie Haberman, who's a great reporter on CNN, and she was sort of saying, well, he deserves some credit for coming forward now. I didn't quite say take a leak on it. I think I said pour a lukewarm soda on it or something.
That's the difference.
I want it to be family friendly, but
I know that's the difference. You're on when you're on cable news, especially in the morning. You got to clean it up. But here on this podcast, you could have gone even further if you wanted on that, and I would have accepted and allowed it because this guy is such. He's done so much damage. It's easy to call names. I'm trying to be better than that, but he's done so much damage, which is what you write a lot about in the book. I've talked with people that I'm sure you're familiar with or know. I know you know. Laura really well, and of course, Glenn Kirshner, my friend Eric Siegel. It feels like anybody who ever spent time in the DOJ has a lot of problems with what his tenure did to the Department of Justice. And you write about that in the book, and you write about basically all the terrible things that he did, which is why this is such an important, I call it a history book in a way. So what was the Department of Justice's reputation, according to you, your perception of it, and probably a lot of people who came through before you and after you, and what happened during his tenure to it? Why does it matter?
I think the best way I can describe this for you, Pete, is I was at DOJ from 2012 from 2004 till 2012, 8 years. And the way it worked out is almost exactly the first half was under the George W. Bush administration, right? AGs were Ashcroft, Gonzalez, and Mukasey, all Republicans. And then about midway through, Barack Obama got elected. I tell people January 21st, 2017, the day after Barack Obama was inaugurated, felt no different inside DOJ to me or 99% of us who worked on the line. And I joke with Preet Bharara, who was my boss, came in a few months later. I said, Preet, I have no memory of your first day in the office. I mean, no offense to the guy, but that's a compliment to him and to everybody else because you don't shift with the political winds. DOJ is supposed to stand above and apart, and that was certainly the case Republican, Democrat, under my 8 years there. You don't do the bidding of the president. You don't protect the president's allies. You sure as hell don't ever lie or stretch the truth. And you don't weaponize DOJ to go after people the president doesn't like and to promote false narratives that the president may like. And Bill Barr did all of those things. And Pete, I'm glad you sort of note that about the book, because I had spent so much time on CNN talking about Bill Barr's corruption. And then when the idea came to write the book, when you lay it out, it's like so many people who've read it, pre-readers, have said, I forgot about all this, or like, I remember that incident, but I don't remember how bad it was. So I think it's really important that this record be made.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It really is, because it's so easy to forget. And that's why, so many things I think happen over and over again, because a generation passes in some cases. But in this case, things move so quickly. If it's just a couple years or a day, really, in my brain, you forget about these things. But your book reminds us about so many of these horrible things. And I'll jump all over the place with the book. But everybody should read it. It's really fascinating. Like we're talking about, very important to understand what happened. It would seem to me I feel like a lot of people made this mistake, and either they didn't read it well, and I mean legal experts, either they didn't read the record well, they didn't live during that time, or they maybe fell for what I think you kind of touched on, his kind of demeanor, the way he is. Yeah. He's kind of a mild-mannered guy. He seems highly intelligent. But some people didn't. Some people said when he came back in, or when Trump selected him, that he was a bad guy. I didn't know anything about anything, as usual, Elie, but I was like, he must be a bad guy. He has to be a bad guy. Why?
By definition.
Because Trump, anything he touches is bad. Right. So how did he get the job? And what did you think when you learned about it? What did you know about him? And what did you think when he got the job?
So the funny thing is, Pete, and I quote myself in the book, I have a whole section where I quote a lot of people who were Trump critics, including myself generally, who praised the initial selection of Bill Barr. And I happened to be on set at CNN the day that it came out that Donald Trump was going to nominate this guy, Bill Barr. And they asked me, I had a few minutes to look him up and sort of make sure I had the right guy. And I said something like, I had a producer here pulled the clip for me. And I said something like, look, what you want is someone who's stable and experienced and serious, and he seems to be all those things, so he seems like a good pick. Of course, I end up writing this book. What I didn't know at that moment...
Later, I'll write a book about him called Hatchet Man.
Right, exactly. Exactly. What I didn't know at that moment, but came out very soon after, was that Bill Barr had auditioned for this job. He went on his own, and he wrote a 19-page single-spaced memo that basically, and remember the timing here, this is right in the middle of the Mueller investigation, which was this enormous threat to Donald Trump. Bill Barr went out of his way to write a memo that basically said, and his word was, that Mueller's theory of obstruction of justice was, and I quote, fatally misconceived. Misconceived meaning wrong, fatally meaning like dead, right? And I saw that, and then I wrote a column for CNN saying, well, he can't be confirmed. He's already prejudged the most important case he'll ever deal with. He's already said it's DOA when he gets it. And the Democrats fought that hard at the confirmation, but they just didn't have the numbers. He was approved almost straight party line. And, Barr tried to BS at his confirmation hearing, like, oh, no, that was just me as a concerned citizen, just lending my sage advice. Like, give me a break. And by the way, you know what? First of all, who believes that? But it's more than who believes that. If it was just penny for your thoughts, why did he do media? He did media interviews, where he slagged Mueller's report. So you're right. I mean,
because he knew who was watching. I mean, Donald Trump watched TV for 4 years.
Exactly. I mean, that's how a lot of people got their gigs, right? By going on TV. I mean, it's Kayleigh McEnany and
Scott Atlas, who ran the COVID relief, and the guy was like a radiologist.
Whitaker, the clown who preceded Bill Barr, right? The temporary AG, he was just the way he got the gig was going on air and raging. And Donald Trump said, "Who's this guy?" So Barr told us all what he was. Barr was savvy enough to know what he needed to do and say to get through to Donald Trump, which is, hey, boss, I'm going to take care of you, And he did what he told us he would do.
So it seems like a friend of mine who worked at DOJ, like he's a little bit older, during Iran-Contra, and I think was somehow involved with that. He was like, listen, this guy protected the worst actors in that horrible, illegal scandal. And it seems like that's his view. And to some extent, I'm frightened that continues to be the view of even Merrick Garland's DOJ and other people in government. Protect the powerful, protect institutions, as opposed to bring accountability, which I think restores, as you say, needs to be the reputation, in this case, of DOJ. You write about that in your book, how it should be done. So I feel like that was his thing. He was protecting powerful people, in this case, the president, whoever it is, and specifically Donald Trump. He protected him throughout. He was his personal lawyer, people said.
Not just protected Donald Trump, but lied to do it and was dishonest. And I say in the book, I call Bill Barr the worst 4-letter word you can call somebody in the public is liar. Yeah. And I say in the book, both fields I worked in, the law and media now, you are really hesitant, healthily so, to call someone a liar. You go, oh, well, he misstated that fact, or he wasn't quite accurate. I'm sorry. Bill Barr lied to us, to the public, to the media, to Congress so many times over that I'm not pulling punches with this guy. Why would I? He lied to us about the Mueller report. He lied to us about the election fraud. He lied to us about even small things, his reasons for firing the Southern District U.S. attorney right before a few months before the election. So he lied. He bent the law as well. He took ridiculous legal positions over and over to try to squash the Ukraine complaint, to intervene, talk about protecting powerful people. It wasn't just the president, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone. I mean, here's a typical piece of Bill Barr BS. He was asked, why did you intervene only in the cases of Michael Flynn and Roger Stone, right? We remember they both got convicted and Barr jumped in from his attorney general suite.
Hold on a second. Yeah. Did he really... there probably thousands of other cases moving through DOJ that we weren't familiar with, that he might have also put his finger on the scale on, intervened. Did he really only intervene in those two villains cases?
So let me be a little more specific. He only undermined what his prosecutors had already committed to on the record, right? And there's an important difference here, which I talk about in the book. The AG absolutely can override anyone in the DOJ. Any higher ranking person can override any lower ranking person. I talk about in the book. There was times when I would want to do it this way, and my supervisor would go, "No, we're going to do it that way." And when I was a supervisor, I did the same thing. That's all perfectly legit behind closed doors. What made the Flynn and the Stone cases so outrageous is the prosecutors on that case had gotten all the necessary approvals within DOJ. Seek this sentence, try to keep the conviction in place, and then after they filed on DOJ letterhead with all the proper approvals, Bill Barr then stepped in. There's only 2 times this happened. He then stepped in from up above and publicly stabbed his own guys in the back and said, no, I want a lower sentence for Roger Stone. No, I want to dismiss the Michael Flynn case. And both times he completely twisted the law and really undermined his own people. And why these two? And I say in the book, let's just do a little mental exercise here. DOJ charges about 80,000 people per year as a whole. So let's imagine you took 80,000 Post-it notes, right? And you wrote the name of one defendant on each of those posts and you stuck them all on a huge wall. And you just took 2 darts and you put on a blindfold and you chucked them at the wall. What would be the odds that the 2 Post-it notes it would hit would be 2 of the president's closest cronies, who, by the way, could have flipped on him and had negative information about him? I mean, and Bill Barr was asked about that at some point, and he said something like, well, those were the ones that happened to cross my desk. It's like, oh, okay, they just fell from the sky across your desk. Like, come on. I mean, and Bill Barr, by the way, is smart. I certainly concede that. But I want to say this: he's not a genius. He thinks he's a genius, but he's not. And he's really good at what I call a Bill Barr special, which is some of these memos that he wrote or justifications. When you glance at it, you go, oh, that looks like something a smart lawyer would do. It's got a lot of citations in it. It's got a lot of pages, but it's garbage. When you look at it as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, it doesn't hold up for a second. It's very easy to knock down. So he's a smart guy and he knew better, but he thinks he's a little smarter than he is.
The thing that I don't understand, we'll step outside the book and even legal expertise for just a moment, but when we say that Bill Barr is smart, or I know what you're saying, and I agree with everything you're saying. He's had a very successful career and so on. But the thing that gives me pause is that Bill Barr sold his entire reputation out to this guy. Yeah. People do that. I've done that. I've given everything I got on behalf of somebody because I really believe in them. But it's just so bizarre, even and certainly at the point that Bill Barr came in, knowing who Trump was, that even to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions was the first senator to endorse Donald Trump. Yeah. And Jeff Sessions had a long history. Say whatever you want about the guy. He created his reputation. And Donald Trump destroyed that man. Destroyed him. And I was happy to watch it because I hated Jeff Sessions. But you knew he was going to do that to everybody. Bill Barr had to know that he was going to eventually be destroyed. And right now we're watching the destruction literally today in the news as he goes after him for not being loyal enough. So when I hear him or others being called smart, I'm like, they sidled up to this guy. They must have known. They must have known he was going to tear him down. That's my rant, sorry.
I believe Bill Barr, based on his actions, did not view, there's some people who I think just gaze at Donald Trump like he's, this mystical being, right? I mean, your Stephen Millers, your, guys like that, who just see him as some of the members of Congress, some of the Matt Gaetz types, right?
Yeah.
Who think he's
and about 70 million Americans.
Well, right. Maybe to some extent. But then there's other people, and I put Bill Barr in this second category, who I think view Donald Trump as a vehicle, or treated Donald Trump more as a vehicle, as a means to an end. And for Bill Barr, people always ask, well, why? Why would he do this? He was an older guy. He had plenty of money. He'd already been AG once. And I I argue two things in the book. Well, three things. One, he wanted power. I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with that. I always tried to get promotions. I would have become AG if I could have, you know what I mean? And then he put on this whole act, though, Bill Barr, at his confirmation hearing and elsewhere of I didn't want this job. I just was in semi-retirement. I wanted to just spend time with my grandkids. I mean, bull. He did the audition memo. He did media. So let's start with that. I don't hold that against him. Number two, which I also don't hold against him much, is he has this very extreme view of the law. He's a Federalist Society guy. That's fine. You can be in the Federalist Society. I mean, I don't agree with much of what the Federalist Society offers, but this idea that the president sort of stands above and beyond everybody else. But Bill Barr took that to, he believes that, and he took that to such a ridiculous extreme that he kept getting his ass kicked in court because he was arguing ridiculous things like the president doesn't ever have to follow any subpoena that he doesn't feel like following. Of course that was going to lose in court. Of course it did. Here's the real insidious thing. Bill Barr is, and you alluded to this, Pete, having read the book, Bill Barr is a real culture warrior. And this is like an old school religious soldier kind of thing.
I actually think this is the most important part of your book. I really do. I think this is the most important part of a person, because you break down a lot of legal issues and a lot of the cases which matter. I mean, I think the most important thing is what he did to cover for Trump on Mueller, and we'll talk about that. But this part right here, to me, is the most important part but by the way, of any person. What is your core sense of beliefs and your moral values, and how do you use whatever position you have in life to, broadcast them, to spread them? So go ahead. Sorry. I just wanted to underscore how
that's well put. And by the way, I do want to say there is this persistent rumor that Bill Barr is a member of this weird group, Opus Dei. He's not. I say that in the book, that's a false rumor. However.
No, but I think my father-in-law is. Go ahead.
Okay, well, maybe the next book will be about Pete's father-in-law. I don't know how it'll sell, though. So Bill Barr has deeply held religious beliefs, which is fine. I don't judge that. Catholic. However, he has extremist views that he then acted on as Attorney General. And we've dug up old speeches and papers that he had written and given in the 90s, where he rails against, and I quote, the homosexual movement, and blames it for the ills in our society, for the broken family, for homelessness, for mental illness. He uses all this really extraordinary, frightening language about we must retake the hillside, we must regather the flock and charge the troops back up the hill and regain control of our society. Yep. He views what he says, the Judeo-Christian, not any religiosity, by the way, only in his view, Judeo-Christian beliefs. Judeo-Christian beliefs are the only sound principle to organize any society. I mean, that is not what our country is about. Our country is very protective of religious freedom, but also of separation of church and state.
I call bullshit every time I hear that, because I'm like, let's say 70% of Jewish or Catholic Christian beliefs. Let's say a lot of good stuff in there. But we know that's not what you're talking about when you refer to Judeo. You're talking about the lunch menu that you've decided to choose from that most Jews and Christians don't even think about, things like abortion and gay marriage. That's what we know you're talking about. You're not talking about my brother's keeper and the good stuff.
Yep. And he's more than just a religiously observant person. He's a zealot, an extremist zealot. Yes. And he started to give a little hint of this at the very end of his most recent term. He gave a particular speech in 2019 where he gave some hints of this sort of zealotry and this We have to regain the battlefield. At one point, he says and then that calls us to go find his earlier speeches. He says, "What are we to do? Backpedal off the field of battle like a bunch of sheep?" I mean, he's really sounds to me like, and Pete, you and I are probably about the same age. Like, you remember when the cultural warrior really became a big thing in DC in like the 80s, the 90s, right? And you had your Pat Robertson running for president, and it's reminiscent of that to me. And by the way, this isn't just benign, because a lot of this informed what Bill Barr did. I mean, he went on a killing spree. He said, even down the very end of his term, when he knew it was over, let's just execute as many people as possible. He started scheduling executions for January 13th, 15th, like days before he was done.
That's right.
He was let's kill as many people as we can.
That's right.
I mean, he took a view in the Supreme Court. He was opposed to equal rights for LGBTQ people, right? We got an important, he lost. He was wrong on the law again. But there was an important ruling in 2019, I believe, or 2020, that gave LGBTQ people extra protections that they're entitled to, equal protection under the law. Bill Barr took a position against that on behalf of the United States. So this isn't just sort of, theoretical. It manifested itself in what he did as AG.
That's why it's the most important part of your new book, and that's why I think that you probably shouldn't, but upgrade your adjectives about him, because I forgot about the executions after the election. I forgot about that. Like, to me, the things that you just pointed out and that you write about in that chapter, that meets my threshold for bad person. I mean, executing people who had questionable cases and trials. And I mean, it's after the election, bad makes for bad.
Well, let me amend then. Do I think he's a bad person? Yes, he's dishonest, as I argue in the book. And worse than that, do I know if he's a nice guy? Like, the people I know who know him say, like, he's pleasant. But you can be a bad person and pleasant. I'll say that.
People are different one-on-one. I'm sure Hitler had some kind conversations, and then he implemented genocides. Like, I think the policies that you support and that you write about that this guy supports and things that you did, that's who you are, not when you're face to face. Even Trump apparently has a hard time being an asshole sometimes to people because he's such a coward to their face. I mean, we all know those people. So let's talk about just a few of the other horrific things that he did. And a few minutes we have left here, and everybody's got to get this book, because I can't barely touch on what Elie writes about and research in Hatchet Man, but we got to talk about the Mueller report. I mean, this was such a big deal. Take us back to, and also I always think about how, like, the New York Times and the Washington Post, I think, got the framing wrong, because they kind of went along with Bill Barr's framing as the summary of the report came out. Remind us what happened and what his role was there.
So Bill Barr was the first person who got the Mueller report. It was basically the first thing that happened of significance once Bill Barr became the Attorney General. He got the report from Mueller. Nobody else saw it. 448 pages on a Friday. It was March 22nd. 2 days later, 48 hours later, on Sunday night, he issued his infamous 4-page letter where he said, first of all, basically, no collusion. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, no collusion, and I find there's no obstruction. Okay? First of all, that's complete BS. You cannot read a 448-page memo, absorb it in 2 days, and decide a complex legal issue like obstruction of justice in 2 days. And by the way, it was exactly what he told us he was going to do in his audition memo, and he was dead wrong. I mean, I was one of over 1,000 prosecutors who signed a letter saying this is absolutely obstruction. Start with that. He also literally chopped pieces of sentences out of context to make it sound like Mueller had found there was just no connection between the Trump campaign and Russia overall. But actually, if you look at the report, Mueller says, look, collusion is not a crime. We know that. That's just a buzzword. Here's what Mueller found. Russians committed crimes to interfere with the election. They did it because they wanted to help Trump win. The Trump campaign knew about this criminal effort to interfere with them and expected to benefit from it, and had dozens and dozens of contacts where they tried to coordinate. So I don't even buy into no collusion anymore. But here's one of the things that people may have forgotten that was so devious that Bill Barr did. Not only did he lie to us about the Mueller report, then he held it back from the public and from Congress. Do you remember how long, Pete? Let me put you on the spot here.
I don't even remember that he held it back. But to be fair, I don't remember what happened this morning.
Fair enough.
That's why your book is important. Yeah.
Bill Barr took 2 days, like I said, to read the whole report and issue his 4-page letter. For the next 27 days, we did not have the Mueller report. He did. He had it in the closet somewhere.
That's right.
We had his 4-pager, but he held it back for 27 days. And you know why? He said, I had to redact it, meaning like cross out the classified stuff. Bullshit. A federal judge later found that's not convincing, and you didn't even do the redactions right. I've redacted stuff. Like, he had the entire DOJ at his disposal. You get a team together, you do that in a weekend, you do that in a week, maybe 27 days. And in the meantime, during those 27 days, he gave press conferences, he testified in Congress, and this narrative that Bill Barr put out there took hold. Yes. Donald Trump declared, I'm free and clear. Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, everybody said, it's over. And then, think about human nature. You tell everyone it's this way, and then 27 days later, you give them a much longer document that says, actually, it's not that way. Too late.
Doesn't matter.
Two people, the opinion calcified around that. And so that withholding of it is so devious by Bill Barr. And it's one of those like little extra details that I think people forgot about that's really important.
Yeah, it was hard to change that narrative, hard to reframe it once we got the facts and found out what was redacted. I also wanted to ask you write about the E. Jean Carroll case. And of course, that's in the news now because now Merrick Garland seems to be taking up. And I feel like I've heard you talk about this. You published your book before that developed. So tell us about what Bill Barr did. Tell us about this case where, Trump had you can take it from there.
I'm critical of Merrick Garland on this, by the way. So E. Jean Carroll is a writer who alleged that in the she alleged recently in 2019 that back in the mid-90s, Donald Trump raped her in I think it was Bergdorf Goodman, some fancy department store in Manhattan, and claimed she had a dress that still had DNA from him on it. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump then lashed out at her and said she's a liar and said she's, and I quote, not my type.
As president, while he was president.
Yes, in 2019. E. Jean Carroll then sued Donald Trump for defamation, right? Now, here's the rule. If you get sued for something as a federal employee, for something you do within your job, DOJ defends you. And the United States becomes the party to the case and it gets very quickly dismissed because you can't sue somebody for something they do in their job. And I talk about in the book, when I was a federal prosecutor, once in a while you get some jailhouse lawyer, someone you locked up who would sue you and say, oh, he maliciously prosecuted me. Mm-hmm. And DOJ would represent you. But the way it was always explained to me is if that happens, we'll represent you. But if you go to a bar one night and get in a bar fight and you get sued for that, we won't. That's not your professional capacity. You're on your own, right? So the question was Donald Trump's defamation of E. Jean Carroll, were his statements that she's a liar and she's not my type, was that something that's within the job description of president? Now, look, I will grant it is probably the broadest job description of any official in our government, and it should cover an awful lot of what the president does. But the idea that it's part of the president's job to defame somebody who's accused him of rape is insane. And I said so at the time, and the federal judge in Manhattan who heard the case not agreed with me, he didn't, but came to the same ruling. Right. He said, he goes, look, there's a lot that's in the president's job, but this ain't one of them. Now, Merrick Garland comes in and inherits this mess, and I feel for him because prosecutors sometimes inherit messes from their predecessors. I've been in that situation. And he has to decide, do I drop this appeal or do I appeal it? And Merrick Garland actually decided to keep up the appeal. And I think it was dead wrong. Why did Merrick Garland do it? Look, I think Merrick Garland is going out of his way to avoid any political turbulence. And I think in so doing, he's not doing his job as a prosecutor. I think he wants to stay out of controversy. I think he wants to stay away from anything that can be seen as intentionally, affirmatively undoing what the prior administration did. But I think he's bending over backwards to do that in a way that's not the prosecutor's job. And
I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I do feel like accountability is important in general. You have, at the end of your book, you have, solutions, and a lot of these you go to the idea of creating accountability to bring, to rehabilitate the reputation of the Department of Justice, which so many people, serve with integrity. And to me, that's what this is. Like he's being an institutionalist and doing the things that you just described. But in fact, we do have to undo so many of the things. And not only just the laws, but the norms that he did. That is accountability. And you do have to. So I feel like that's the main issue here is we have to have accountability. And so often, especially Democrats, I think, it's usually Democrats that have to deal with this. They just say that's in the past. We got to look ahead. It's like, no, that's why we get Trumps.
I agree on the importance of restoring accountability. And one of the things I'm looking at is, what is Merrick Garland going to do about Donald Trump, about the obstruction of justice, for example, or about Ukraine? I talk in the book about how Bill Barr refused to even open a criminal investigation on Ukraine. I mean, it seems to me, and I don't know what exactly, I don't know everything, but there's zero public indication, zero reporting that Merrick Garland is in any way even taking a look at anything Donald Trump did. It's all within the statute of limitations. He could charge it all. And I think it seems right now as if Merrick Garland has made some sort of calculation of to wrestle with Donald Trump, to meaningfully investigate and potentially charge him is a nightmare. And it will suck all the energy and attention off everything I'm trying to do. And it will drag us backwards into these, squabbles. But I think that if that's the approach, then he shouldn't be the attorney general. I mean, look, if your job as a prosecutor was simply to find the path of least resistance, that ain't what a prosecutor does. Yeah. And, sometimes you have to take on cases that are messy and difficult and ugly. And I think by failing to do that, Merrick Garland is sort of hoping that the natural gravitational pull of DOJ brings it back towards the middle. And that is a thing. But I think he's being too passive, and I think he's accepting and in some cases adopting some of the abuses of the past administration.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, unfortunately. I mean, I always think about the Obama administration and torture. And I understand why they made the choices that they made politically, but to me, it's how do you say fucking torture. We tortured people, and a lot of brave people spoke out against it, resigned, and so on. But the rest of the world knows that we tortured people. And while Obama kind of apologized, rightfully so sorry about the torture, but we're moving forward. No, those people. By the way, the people, the architects of torture, made millions of dollars in those government contracts and. Anyway, you have to have accountability at some point. All right, give me. I got to let you go, and there's just so much more in this book that we didn't touch on. But let's end with on a positive note with what you think needs to be done in terms of reforms, solutions. You have a chapter about this in Hatchet, man.
Yeah, I have a whole chapter laying out specific. There's two ways to do this, right? And we need to do them both. There are specific reforms, right? We need to, for example, disavow Bill Barr's view explicitly that the president holds ultimate prosecutorial power, which was something Bill Barr wrote in his audition memo, that the president can order DOJ to investigate or drop any investigation of anybody. We need better rules for the special counsel. Robert Mueller got a little bit tripped up by that. We need more separation, formal separation between the White House and DOJ when it comes to criminal matters. I lay out several others. The bigger picture, though, is we need to restore norms. And what I mean by that is, and I try to point this out in the book, so much of what the Justice Department does is not written in black and white. There's no rule. There's no law saying the DOJ should not take orders from the White House. It's just something that has long been observed by both political parties as an important and necessary practice. And so much of the performance of the Justice Department comes down to the integrity and the principles of the people who run it. And I think we just need better people in charge. And I think we need people who understand the mission of DOJ better. And I make this point repeatedly about Bill Barr. He was never a real prosecutor. He never tried a case as a prosecutor. He was AG twice, but he doesn't know what it's like to work in a real prosecutor's office. He doesn't know what it's like to try a case. The new regime does have that going for it. Merrick Garland and his top people all were legit real prosecutors. But we need to get back to those basic principles. You don't fudge the truth. You don't play politics. You don't backstab your colleagues. We need to get back to those basics.
So you were state, federal prosecutor, and now you're a media guy and an academic. You got this new book out, which is really, really great, and I hope everybody goes and gets it. You're on CNN, where you got a deal there, and you got a podcast. You're a professor, right? So when we talk about better people, I mean, would you go back? You seem like a good guy.
Well, that is a great question. No, I mean, I'm happy for now. I did, it's a younger person's game. It's exhausting, Pete. Yeah. Doing these trials. I mean, I would shed weight. I would lose 15, 20 pounds when I do trial. I couldn't eat. It's exhausting. It's stressful. And I love what I'm doing now because it really gives me a lot of the same satisfaction, which is you get to work on important issues. You get that adrenaline rush sometimes, right? Of things are happening quick. Oh my gosh, I got to react on my feet. Right, you're on set. Oh, this news came in. Yep. And it's satisfying.
You have to wear makeup. I know that you like to wear the makeup.
Listen, Pete.
I like to be doted on.
I am an expert on makeup to an embarrassing degree, especially. I'll tell an embarrassing story. We got a thing. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and we got a thing in the mail the other day from some makeup company, and we realized it was addressed not to my wife, not to my 14-year-old daughter, but to me, awesome. A 46-year-old man. But especially with COVID, right? Like, because I didn't think about it. I used to just come in and sit in the makeup chair, and the experts would make me look good. When you're at home and you're like, oh my God, I look like a horror show. Yeah. So I've learned to put on my own makeup, and I like order the stuff, I'll cop to it. It's part of the gig, and I'm used to it.
But I interrupted you with that, Joe. The point is you're living your best life, and that's a younger man's game, which I think is really interesting. It's just, to me, there's a lot of career people in DOJ and at the state level as well. And you, as you're writing about, as a lot of my friends who joined me who are former prosecutors or worked, somehow, somewhere you want decent people. You want in government. You think lawyers have such bad names, but when you're working in government, a lot of times these are people who have to be decent, have to be moral, have to make all kinds of decisions that aren't their own personal opinion. And I just hope that we have those people there now, and it's just so disconcerting because of what happened.
And let me say this, DOJ really, so much of the attention is focused on the attorney general. I get that. But the real lifeblood of DOJ is the regular folks like I once was and so many,
what happened? So how much did that hollow out during Trump? How many of those people resigned? How many of those people stayed through? Like, and by the way, how do you guys know? How do you keep track of like the morality and why someone would stay or leave? It's tough.
Well, there's no science to it. It's just from talking to friends and colleagues and that kind of thing. I don't know many people who resigned because of Bill Barr. I mean, obviously the people he undermined on the Roger Stone and Michael, there's actually 7 different prosecutors resigned off of 4 different cases.
Which is super unprecedented, right?
Because of Bill Barr's political interference, which is totally unprecedented. Yeah. But in terms of just my friends and former colleagues, nobody left because of Bill Barr. They were disgusted by what was happening. Many of them were disgusted and horrified by what was happening. But their approach was what we were always taught, which was just do your job, keep your head down, do your job, right? And really, for your 99% of the cases in DOJ, it's not going to make a difference, right? When you're doing a gang takedown, when you're doing a mob takedown, when you're doing a securities fraud case, it doesn't matter what Bill Barr's doing. And so I think the mindset of many of the good people there was, I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to do my work. If I ever get asked to do something inappropriate or political or dishonest, I'll refuse. I'll resign. But that won't apply to the vast majority of them. But I can tell you, morale is much better since this crew left, and there's much less of a fear of like, oh my goodness, am I going to be asked to do something horrible or inappropriate here?
Final question, the fun question. We are about the same age. I'm 45, and this is the question of the week I think I'm going to ask everybody. Dropped my daughter off at camp yesterday for 5 weeks. My daughters are 16 and 13. You have kids similar ages. Yep. I think you're Jewish, which I'm going to assume means you went to camp. I feel like that is an almost always accurate assumption. I used to question my Jewish friends, why have kids and then send them away? Then I started sending my kid away to camp, and I was like, this is one reason why maybe Jewish people are successful, because they learn independence, they learn network, they learn from adults that aren't their parents. Did you go to camp? Where are you today on the idea of sending your kids away to camp?
You nailed it. I was a 10-year, I was 5 years I went to an overnight camp, and then 5 years I worked at that overnight camp.
I asked the right guy.
As I'm constantly reminding my now 15-year-old son, when I was 14, I was a full-time dishwasher, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, scrubbing dishes, cleaning out the swill, which is the big industrial machine. And then I was a dishwasher one summer, I was a waiter one summer, I was a cook one summer. I can still cook massive quantities of, I can do eggs. I can take one egg in each hand, crack it, boom, 2 at a time. How about that?
That's impressive.
If I had eggs, I would demonstrate for you. I'm a big, and then I was a counselor when I was like 18, 19. It was the greatest experience of my childhood. You're right, Pete. And look, it's not like you're roughing it. I went to a cruddy camp. I was telling my kids the other day, this was the camp that would be like getting its butt kicked by the rich kids camp in the 80s movie. You know what I mean? Like I went to that camp.
Fine.
But and you're not like, there's no hardship to it, but like you have to, when it's laundry day, you got to make sure your stuff's in there or else you're not going to have clothes. You know, when you run out of toothpaste, you can't just go, Mom, I'm out of toothpaste. You got to like borrow some, or you got to like, you know. Yeah. So it teaches you real life lessons. I'm a big believer in it. I've sent my kids to camps, and it's a win-win because the kids have a great time, and man, do the parents love it when they're gone too, right?
I'm not there. I'm devastated. I'm codependent on my 16-year-old. We're really close, and I said, what am I supposed to do when I'm missing you? And she, you know, rightfully doesn't allow me to put that on her. She's like, that's on you. You're an adult man. Number one.
I used to, when my daughter went, and it was a little more with my daughter, like they have a thing now where you can email them, right? Yeah. And then the camp then prints it out and hands it to them, which of course, you know, in my day, I would write a letter. It would take 4 days to get to my parents' house, and then they would respond, and then 8 days later. But I would email my daughter like every day, literally every day.
That's where I'm going to be at, I think.
You know, she'd be like, Dad, every day you have to, and I'm, you know, just read it. If you don't want to read it, don't read it. But
well, I'm
a big believer in it, Pete.
I'm psyched to hear that answer. I really am. I'm going to be talking about it with people all week, and those who went to camp and had a good, you know, experience. And the other thing is, our kids today, we have no idea what to do with them, unlike any other generation, because of the phones and social media. Totally. And I think everybody, we don't know what we're doing is right or wrong. And now my daughter, I know this, my daughter is being woken up every morning by a bugle, and there's no phone for her to turn to. That's a good,
I
think.
The phone thing is so refreshing to just pry that damn thing out of their hands. Camp's a little bit, you know, the other thing that's a big difference is like everyone specializes now, right? Like all these kids can't go to camp because he's got a soccer clinic, because he's got to train for this. It's like, I still remember, this is how weird it was back in the 80s when I was a camper. There was one kid, I still remember his name, who like would appear late. He would show up like the second week because he was at a soccer thing. And we were like, what is this kid?
Bill fucking Barr. Oh, Billy Barr. That's his name.
No,
he's not. It wasn't him. Yeah, I mean, exactly. So there's all these other specialties that everybody is. Yeah. But really, in fact, the kind of camp you went to and my daughter's seemingly going to is comprehensive for all of it, like life skills.
It was a generalist, you know. It was like you remember the movie Meatballs with Bill Murray?
Yeah.
It was like that, the loser camp. You know?
I love it. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Well, look, you turned out pretty well. I'm so happy to talk to you. Congratulations on the book. Hatchet Man. Everybody, go get it now. Elie Honig, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thanks, Pete. That was really fun.
Yes, it was. Indeed, it was. Really enjoyed that. Would love to have him back. Hope that you'll get that book, Hatchet Man, How Bill Barr Broke the Prosecutor's Code and Corrupted the Justice Department. Follow him on Twitter. Let him know you heard him. It's the first time he's been on. Let him know that folks are listening and appreciating what he said. And hopefully he'll come back and join us again sometime soon, as my next guest often does. He's been joining me for years. Very good friend of mine. Love talking to this guy. Have great deal of admiration and respect for him, even though we almost always argue, which today's conversation is no exception. We had a long argument about politics, the politics of war, really. Democrats versus Republicans, conservatives versus liberals when it comes to supporting, quote, supporting the military. I loved the argument. I think that you will as well. It never gets awkward or personal. I love talking to Paul, and I learn a lot from him. He's super passionate, super opinionated. He hosts an awesome podcast I really like, puts a lot into every episode. It's called Independent Americans on the Righteous Media brand, which he's also the president of. You can follow him on Twitter at Paul Rieckhoff. As always, all the links in the show notes. Here is my conversation right now, mostly about veterans and veterans issues, but always about a few other things, including parenting, which I think is where we started. Here it is right now, Paul Rieckhoff. It's summer. It's summertime. I've got Paul Rieckhoff, one of my favorite people, really good friend of mine. It's always great to see you and have you on the podcast, and we can catch up and talk for hours. But first, I have a long list of serious issues to get with you, but I'll start with a light one. Where are you as a grown man with young kids on cargo shorts?
Oh, for the kids, absolutely.
No. For you.
Oh, for me.
Sorry.
So I've evolved.
Yeah.
I've evolved. Cargo shorts are too bulky for me.
Yeah.
And as a guy who wore them in the military, they're always getting caught on stuff. And as a father of a 5 and 2-year-old, I'm always jumping in and out of the car more than I did out of a Humvee in the Army. And cargo shorts get caught on all kinds of shit. So I have bought the most amazing pair of shorts called Cool Shorts, Kuhl. It's an American company out of the Rockies.
I have their pants.
I buy all their shit. Like I'm wearing them right now. I don't know if you can see them.
Oh, they look good.
They have these little pockets on the side.
Yes.
Where you can also put a mask in, which was really convenient during COVID time. Well, I guess we're still in COVID time. And they're stretchy, and they dry quickly if you get them wet or your kid pukes on you or whatever else. So I'm all about cargo shorts, especially after today is the first day of camp for my 5-year-old. And Friday was the last day of kindergarten, which was highlighted by 2 stitches. An hour before the end of kindergarten, the school called and said, you got to come pick him up. He busted his chin open. He needs stitches. I said, can he stay one more hour? I don't want him to miss the last hour of school. He wanted to stay. He ended up staying, and I know you'll appreciate this. He was a champ. We got stitches on the way to going to Watkins Glen, and we spent the weekend at Watkins Glen watching the races, which I highly recommend for an amazing family experience for everyone. Watkins Glen Racetrack up in the Finger Lakes of New York. You said you've been there before. That's
I
why
know
I
it
also
well.
mentioned
My
it.
dad brought me there when I was a little boy, and I watched actor Paul Newman race. It was the first famous person I ever saw in person. And my dad, who's now, I think, 75, was at Watkins Glen with you and your kids. He was there at the same time. And my dad is an instructor. He teaches driving on that track for, I guess, affluent guys who have like Porsches and BMWs and Corvettes and whatever. My dad like goes in their cars with them and teaches them. So, yeah, I know all about it. And I think it's a great thing to bring your kids to and introduce, I'm not a huge auto racing fan as an adult, but I think I could get back into it. I've gotten a little bit interested.
It's beautiful, and it's on the lakes. If you've never driven upstate New York, this is my sales pitch for upstate New York. The drive across 17 out west is one of the prettiest drives I've ever been on. I've driven in Europe and all around the world. And one of my dad points I got to get. Through a friend, we got to hook up. I drove my SUV on the track for 3 laps with my wife in the passenger seat and 2 kids in car seats. So I don't know if anybody's ever driven Watkins Glen at almost 100 miles an hour in an SUV with 2 car seats, but we did it to celebrate my son's kindergarten. So happy summer, Pete. Great to be back with you. Get out, everybody. Even if you're not race fans, get in a car, take the car seats, drive on a racetrack. Summer's here.
One more parenting question, because I did see a tweet, and I thought this would be a good perspective to get. You mentioned a couple times your son just finished kindergarten. You also mentioned on Twitter how hard it was to have your first year of school be in the pandemic. So just a question about what that was like for him, what it's like for you, what you think you missed. And obviously, I'm sure you want to give credit to the teacher, because I can't imagine what that must have been like.
My 5-year-old son's my fucking hero. Okay, imagine a situation where he thinks he might die. He's 5 years old. His friends all think they might die. His first day of school, mask up, get screened, go into this place that looks like a fortress. He had never been inside the school before, and graduation was Friday. I have still never been inside his school, which is kind of daunting for me, not just in the age of COVID, but in the age of school shootings, right? I've never set foot inside my kid's school, which is a little bit crazy for me. But I think he was heroic. I think that he was in a public school where they had so little resources, and you really felt it around like art. They had one social worker for the whole damn elementary school, and this woman is a saint. They went through 2 principals. They had these teachers that were just getting ground into the ground with changes in regulations. But COVID is especially hard for kindergartners, because you're supposed to run around and have fun and hug and play. And they've been told for a whole year to stay in a box, wear a mask, don't touch anything or anybody for basically a year. But they came through it. He's heroic. I really think that they deserve a lot of credit, this generation of kids, but also the educators. I got no time for anybody who's hating on educators. I think if you're hating on educators, it's worse than hating on the troops. And it means you hate America, because what they've gone through is unbelievable. And I really think that when we talk about heroes and helpers, the educators deserve it after this last year. I don't know how they did it.
Well said. Walk a day in their shoes, and then you can criticize them, which is a great segue, Paul, to my first question. I think I reached out to you for a couple of reasons, a bunch of things I wanted to talk about. But I was just like, kind of stunned by Matt Gaetz' questioning of the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the Armed Services Committee hearing. The fact that he's even there, getting the opportunity to speak to folks like these guys is one thing because of who he is, but more importantly, what he asked. And then I was even more stunned, to be honest with you, with the take of one of the most powerful people in conservative or Trump media, which is Tucker Carlson, going off on him, I think a few nights during his program last week and saying he wasn't brave, called him a pig. And it's just that kind of disrespect being paid to those kind of men from people on the right in Congress and media. How is that seen by even conservative members of the military. I mean, saying that you're not brave, even though I've never done what you've done, no matter what the job is, it's so weak. What are your thoughts on that? I know they don't all think the same.
I think cowardice and treasonous behavior and selfishness transcends party. And I think everyone who is objective, no matter where you come from or who you vote for, can realize that in the last couple of years, what has developed is really a political domestic terrorist group. Okay. And it spans parts of the conservative media, parts of the talking head community and the punditry, and parts of Congress. So it goes from Matt Gaetz all the way to Laura Ingraham and many people in between who now put themselves and their personal and political agendas, which are often intertwined, really their personal agendas, their personal wealth, power, influence, ahead of the best interests of our entire country. And, you know, this is the extension of the attacks on teachers, the extension of the attacks on Dr. Fauci. And now they are attacking the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, calling him a pig, calling him a coward, questioning his integrity, also coming after the Secretary of Defense, who, by the way, is the first black Secretary of Defense in history. And there are huge racial undertones here. So you've got somebody like Matt Gaetz, who, in my view, has no honor, has no integrity, is a coward, and should be in jail. Right, who's standing in front of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs who went to Princeton, who has multiple combat tours, and he's lecturing him on America. This is bullshit, and it's performance, and that's what it should be called out for. It's performance. It's performance for themselves and for their narrow political agendas. It's for clicks. They want us to be talking about it right now, which kind of is why I'm careful about it. Before we came on, we said, oh, why is Dan Crenshaw trending? Because Dan Crenshaw knows how to play this game. He's very good at it, right? He's saying we should ban a person from the Olympic team who won't stand for the flag. He knows he's going to get on Fox. He knows you're going to talk about it. MSNBC talks about it. And it becomes this really damaging cycle where we're not talking about the attacks on Syria that happened last night. We're not talking about cyber attacks. And that's where I think it's most damaging, because it's dividing our country. And I've said this to you before on many other topics. Our enemies are celebrating. Osama bin Laden would love to see members of Congress attacking the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Osama bin Laden would love to see a major news network saying the military, it needs to be defunded. I mean, this is our terrorist dream to see this the way this is developed. And I got to call out the Democrats, too, because they're not really great at pushing back here. Right? Like, who is fighting back against Dan Crenshaw? Chris Hayes or Rachel Maddow or you or me, right? Like, there needs to be a coordinated, focused effort that transcends party lines and says, stop this shit. Cut it out. This is our military. They're doing the right thing. Take your political agenda elsewhere. And this is what damn Joe McCarthy. When Joe McCarthy did the communist push, right, he went after the military, and that was the third rail that sunk Joe McCarthy. And I think in many ways this is going to sink definitely the Republican Party.
I don't know the history. I don't know the history of that, and I hope you're right that it will sink the Republican Party as it is today. But that's interesting.
They said there are communists in the military, communists in the army. And that's the you know, when you've gone too far. And I really think that's the important political dynamic here, Pete. You know, my show is Independent Americans. We've debated and talked about that before. Moderate Republicans are running away from the party in droves. Independents are running away in droves. Nobody wants to be a part of this, and it's the Republican equivalent of the Democrats defund the police, right? This is going to hurt them very badly, and it's going to move more people toward the middle.
I hope you're right about that in terms of messaging. I think you make a lot of good points there. But you're also right about just in terms of what they want and how you control the message and how you throw some red meat at, and then we all pick up on it and it gets trending and so on, and how we should be more focused on other things. And so I like to think that I've got, say, 20 minutes with you today, and we've talked about just the way that they've gotten away with those types of criticisms of actual serving military members, from Tucker and Matt Gaetz to Laura Ingraham, who brought you up on her show the other day, which must have been fun. But there are more.
Can I talk on that for a second, Pete? Because I think it's important.
But I just wanted to say I've got Afghanistan departure, which you can talk about, suicides, burn pits, and you mentioned and added to my list the strikes on the border of Syria, Iran. So those are the things that I hope to get to with you if time allows. So please, how does it feel?
This is a playbook, right? And Fox News, the right-wing media, members of the radical fringe of the GOP, which is becoming more and more the dominant part of this party. This is a playbook. They're pulling the Fauci playbook off the shelf, and now they're going to put it on General Milley. They're coming after General Milley. He's going to be enemy number one. They're leading their A-block segments with it. They start with one show, right, with Laura Ingraham or with Tucker, and then they expand across the whole network, and they kind of market test it to see how it's going to do, right? And it is red meat, but they're very careful. Like Laura Ingraham, for example, uses a clip of me on Nicole Wallace.
Yeah.
But she doesn't mention Nicole Wallace, and she doesn't mention my name because she actually doesn't want to elevate us. Because she knows it'll get us more Twitter followers, it'll get us a following. So she very carefully uses the image of us or who we are, and only seldom do they come directly after someone, which she did against Malcolm Nance very recently, which was very racialized. A lot of pictures of Malcolm looking scary, not saying he had been in the military, very carefully playing on those different levers of racism, of fear, of class of warfare. But what they're doing is a strategy. And I want people to know that. Watch the playbook. They do it over and over again. And General Milley is the new Dr. Fauci. And they're going to amp it up until they try to hurt General Milley. And that hurts our national security. He has to deal with this bullshit, right, on the Monday when Biden called strikes into Syria. So we didn't actually, it wasn't just the border. 2 strikes were in Syria. So, hey, America, you may not know it. There was no declaration of war. There was no public debate. Right. Congress didn't take this up. But we are at war with Syria. We fired strikes into Syria while you were at the beach this weekend or watching the playoffs. That's what happened this weekend.
All right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. We should. I saw Chris Murphy's tweet about that. This is always a question about getting congressional approval, thus getting the American public's approval before you launch missiles into another country, regardless of what country it is. And I take your point to the framing. It's really very insightful, and I appreciate it a lot. I do want to ask you, though, about what underpinned the criticisms, because, I love listening to your podcast. I mean, you and I have been friends for a long time. I've always admired you and your thoughts on things, which is why I'm glad to get them here. And I love following you on Twitter, and I saw you share this 10-point argument from a professor about why inclusion and diversity in the military throughout history have really mattered. And it was so interesting. But from your point of view, this criticism of talking about, people are conflating radical, critical race theory. I can never get it with just like inclusion, diversity, welcoming black people, Hispanic people, gay people, always of which you've been a champion of since you've been in the military. And I think probably increasingly with 21st century veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan era. Why is it important, though, Paul Rieckhoff? Why is diversity of gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religion, why is that important for any reason in the military?
Because the military is a reflection of our society. The military should be drawn from all aspects of our society, and it should fight for all aspects of our society that are peaceful and thoughtful and American, right? And the idea that now letting in trans people is going to destroy the military, or letting women do jobs they shouldn't do is going to destroy the military, or letting them read Marx at West Point is going to destroy the military. It's the same bullshit you heard when people didn't want to integrate the genders in the military. It's the same bullshit you heard when they didn't want to allow black soldiers in the military. It's the same old shit, okay? And it's racist, it's divisive, it's political, and it also, for the party and the people that talk about freedom all the time, why should one sector of the country not serve in the military? Right? Like, there's one group of people who get a pass. They're okay with trans people having jobs and living life all around the world and voting, but they can't die for their country. In my view, America is supposed to be about equality and about freedom. And that means everybody has the right to get married, to drink what they want, and to die for their country if they want to, right? Because they want to show how much they love this country. And there are all the other scientific data about how women can perform better physically in certain areas. All this stuff is so fucking tired and done. It was 30 years ago, right? But they think they have a pressure point here. And here's something about the military. The military can't hit back, okay? General Milley is busy fighting our wars, okay? People in active duty can't go on Fox in uniform and push back against Tucker Carlson. And then this was a real problem during Iraq when they couldn't speak up and say this is going in the wrong direction, or they were fearful about Trump. So it's incumbent upon us as thought leaders, as people in the public dialogue, to raise voices of the people who can speak, because Milley's got his hands tied behind his back. Even when he's testifying, he wants to say what he thinks, but he can't. And neither can over 1 million other people in the active duty. So for someone like Laura Ingraham or Tucker Carlson, they're a punching bag. They're really a punching bag that is just sitting up there, and they finally realize that they could just hammer on it, and there's no military news channel that can push back. And by default right now, it's MSNBC. So who would have planned that 20 years ago, that MSNBC was going to be the network defending the military and Fox was going to be the one attacking it? But that's where we are. And I think there's a really important point. It divides our military. It divides our country. It impacts morale. It distracts us. It does all the things that Kim Jong-un and Putin would love to do. So thank you, Laura Ingraham. You're helping our enemies. Thank you, Matt Gaetz. You're helping our enemies.
The thing I don't understand is how Tucker Carlson or anybody, let's pick somebody on the left, some progressive, who has never served in the military or seemingly done anything that requires courage. I mean, even like maybe sports or physical labor. Ted Cruz tweeting that and saying that we're turning the American military into pansies by trying to recruit LGBT people, I guess. And Tucker Carlson saying that Milley is not brave and is a pig. How does anybody in the military, even if you were a far right, conservative, whatever you want, you hear that and you say, you're saying that I'm not brave. I mean, you and I don't agree on our politics, but we're brave. How can you say that? How do conservatives who support these guys and watch these guys and love watching them, and Fox News is always on the base, how do they react when they say that? Or when you hear that, former President Donald Trump called these guys pussies and suckers and all that? How come that's not really offensive to everybody, regardless of their political background?
Well, it's not offensive to everybody because some people just can't be offended by this stuff, right? Like there's a reflection of the American public that exists in the military. Like I drove from Watkins Glens across the country, across the state this weekend. I saw 3 American flags flying in people's front yards. My wife still grew up on Long Island, is shocked by that. Okay, but people will fly Confederate flags in their front yards in New York State this weekend, right? And that is still a thing.
You said, I think you said American flags. You saying you saw?
Sorry, Confederate. Did I say Confederate flag?
Well,
Confederate
first
flags.
You said it both. You saw Confederate flags.
Confederate flags. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to be that lady who got torched on MSNBC for saying
it's fine.
Too many flags on Long Island. Confederate flags in the front yard, usually next to a flag that said like "fuck Biden," which is like, oh, thank you, neighbor. My kid wants to see that every day, right? But like, there are people who are always down for this. Okay, there's a percentage of the country that's always going to watch Fox, that's always going to follow Trump.
No, but
that is hard. That is hardened. Hold on. That's hardened and calcified, right? And that exists in the military too. We can't kick them out because they believe that. But it's a long war. And they're losing more and more of the middle. That group is becoming smaller, more isolated, more calcified. And I do think we have to take a long view on this, right? This is going to hurt them with moderates in Pennsylvania. This is going to hurt them with Republicans in their own party. We just buried John Warner, the World War II veteran, right, who used to be married to Elizabeth Taylor. He served in World War II and in Korea. He's gone. Bob Dole's gone. John McCain's gone. But Trump started this. Trump attacked John McCain. He attacked the Khan family. He took money away from the Pentagon and sent it to the wall. He was politicizing the military to a level we've never seen before. And Milley and others were pushing back from the inside. And that's part of this, too. This is payback. This is Trump paying back Milley for pushing back on him. And it's coming out now in books and other things. He's going to make Milley pay for challenging him, just like he did to everyone else. And we've got to push back. We've got to focus on the long game and the middle, the people who aren't radicalized, the people who can be convinced, even if it's just one person, your grandfather or someone else in your extended family. Maybe this will push them over the edge and eventually you build a broader coalition and isolate them further. But this is like the new war on terrorism. We got to take a multi-decade approach and understand that some of these folks are just going to be hardened and potentially violent too. And that's got to be treated like the national security threat that it is. And that's why the president, the Pentagon, everyone else says domestic extremism from the right is the single most urgent threat to our national security. It's true. It's true. And Laura Ingraham is pouring fuel on that. And Donald Trump is pouring fuel on that. And all it takes is one listener who says, you know what, Milley is an asshole. He takes a shot at him. Right? Like this is endangering the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. You're threatening him with your audience. That's crazy, right? That's crazy. Like the security protocols they have to go through with these people now is out of control. But it's a real thing, and they're making it worse.
I didn't want to interrupt that rant to correct you on something, but you did, in fact, just kill Bob Dole. I mean, he's alive. You said he's gone.
I'm sorry. But he's gone from politics, right?
Yes.
Like he's gone from the politics. He's gone those kinds of moderates that were national security focused, right? George Bush, the first George Bush, right, was a World War II veteran. They're gone now, right? And what do you got instead? You got Dan Crenshaw, right? And you got people that are real. You got Pete Hegseth on Fox, right?
Yeah.
You got Eric Greitens, right? You've got some really right wing, and then you got Kinzinger and others that are more moderate, right? And then you've got, Gallego over here and Tammy Duckworth, but there's this proxy war. But the Republican Party used to be the party of the military. And they were the party of the military, most of all, because they said it all the time. They just said, we love the military, and Democrats were all mixed up about it, so they didn't say it all the time. And then they had John Kerry, and that became all conflicted. But this really cuts to the core of the identity of the party, and I think that's why this is dangerous for the GOP. I think they're going against their own base, and that's going to hurt them over time.
I mean, I'll just try to push back or split hairs with the Republican Party as the party of the military. The conservative movement was always believed in pretty much every war they ever saw. And
but if you test it, right, and this is still true. If you test it in the public, you say who's stronger on defense, right? And then you say, like, who's stronger on health care? It's going to be Democrats, right? Or social issues, right? Or education.
You're absolutely right about that. But it's bullshit. They're not stronger on defense.
It may be bullshit, but the number one reason it's true in the population, in the popular opinion, is because Republicans say it all the time. Like Donald Trump would say, I love the military. I love our veterans.
You're right.
Hillary didn't say it that much. And if you say it enough times, for many people, it becomes true. And now you've seen Biden and others, they recognize there's a populism there. There's maybe a potential voting block they can get, and they say it more. But especially like the Bill de Blasio era of Democrats, they don't know how to talk about this. They also don't know how to talk about cops and other people like that. And you see it blow up over and over again. That cuts to the core of like a 20-year leadership core of the Democratic Party that was really conflicted about Vietnam and didn't know how to move forward. And that cloud still remains. And people like Buttigieg and Tammy Duckworth and others are trying to change that. But it's going to take a while. Most 60, 70-year-olds will say the Republican Party is stronger on defense than Democrats.
I know, but I would simply say that with the criticism that you're making is that, generally speaking, the progressive movement, Democrats have been more critical and questioning of military endeavors and of military budgets.
Really? Like, why is the AUMF still in place after 9/11? Right? Here's the ultimate blow up of that.
I can criticize all these Democrats.
That's the most important thing, though. This is where Democrats should shut the fuck up, really, because they allowed the president to fight never-ending wars with a blank check and no oversight.
But they didn't. They
did. The AUMF is still there.
Yes, but hold on. Nuance matters. It matters, and we should give credit to those who didn't. Many Democrats have been critical of that and didn't vote for it to renew it.
Did the Democratic Party get rid of the AUMF? Did they make it a priority? Have you ever heard about it in the mainstream media until this year?
I think the more important argument about that is where progressives have been on conflict and wars. And specifically, if you want to talk about the votes, the vast majority of Democrats did not vote to support authorizing invading Iraq. They also
didn't make it a priority to rescind the power that the president has to launch, like, even Biden, let's talk about it right now, because it's not the same for everybody. They're okay with Biden launching strikes into Syria, except for a couple people.
I don't disagree with that.
Where are they today saying, hey, if Trump went into Syria, if Trump started shooting rockets into Jordan or into Somalia, they'd say, hey, the president isn't authorized to do this. But with Biden, it's okay. Like, it's got to be the same, especially around these issues. We need consistency from both parties. And just the point that everyone needs to know is we gave George Bush the right to invade and attack any country he wanted.
Republicans
after 9/11.
did. Republicans did.
The Congress did. Many Democrats
did not.
And many Democrats did. Okay.
Too many.
And they've had almost 20 years to make that a priority and fix it. Yeah. Okay. And they didn't. Ask yourself your favorite Democrat. Pick your favorite Democrat and ask yourself when the last time you saw them do a press release on the AUMF.
Chris Murphy constantly. Bernie Sanders. Lots of Democrats. That's the point. I can
Bernie Sanders is not constantly talking about the AUMF.
Well, he is definitely against renewing it.
He didn't talk about it much on the presidential campaign when he was running for president.
We can absolutely talk about priorities. My original point before we started down this road was progressives don't follow blindly military endeavors. Never have. They question them.
I disagree. I think to make it by party line. Okay. Do you think that Joe Manchin does? No, I'm not making it by party line. Joe Manchin?
I'm not. You did. I said progressives. Ideology matters, and it's the idea of questioning.
The definitions matter too. Like if you ask
Paul,
100
you cannot
Democrats
disagree
what
with me.
progressive means,
The far left has always been critical of American militarism and imperialism. Yes or no? The far left has always
since
been
the beginning
critical
of history in America. I don't know. I'm not a historian.
In the last two generations.
Sure, and you could also argue that they've gone too far and they've been anti-military. Right? I met plenty of progressives who don't like the military.
I would unpack anti-military. I'm of the far left, and I've never been anti-military, as you know.
But you know damn well that you and me and many others have been a part of educating the progressive wing of the party over the last 20 years. And this new generation has changed a bit more than the last generation. And the up-and-coming generation is totally different. Like this 17, 18, 19-year-olds, how they feel about the military now is very different. So it's really almost by like 10-year blocks. But the progressive wing of the Democratic Party has a very, let's say, complicated history with the American military over the last generation. And important to note, like the Democrats never elected a veteran. They got close with John Kerry, okay?
As a president.
As president, right. But the Republicans had George Bush. They had candidates like John McCain. They continue to put candidates forward that are military, and they've talked about
George Bush was not military.
I'm sorry?
George Bush was in the National Guard.
No, his father was shot down as a World War II
I thought you were talking about George W. Bush.
And he was in the military.
No, but that's the point. But that's you now took this argument to 2 more minutes, which means I have to say I really got into politics a lot more around that election, 2004, Kerry, Bush. And I'll never forget saying this to people. 2 men are running for the highest office of the land. Both of them are born with silver spoons in their mouth. Both of them born into wealth. One of them, who was born into wealth, volunteered for combat in a controversial war. The other got out of it. Who do you want to vote for? Never mention politics.
I know.
And Republicans supported the guy who escaped military service and tarnished and sullied the guy who served.
That cuts to the core of my point. The Republicans were able to put out essentially a draft dodger against the war hero, but it also cuts to the core. The Democrats also couldn't get him elected. Right? Like the Democrats had a hard time with John Kerry, too. I was at that convention. I was there for the debates.
Not
I was
because
there when
of
they
his
were going back and
military
forth.
service, though. Not because of his choice.
No, in part. So, look, let's talk about Bob Kerry. Right? Did the Democrats have a good time with Bob Kerry's military service? Bob Kerry was running for president at one point.
Yeah.
Okay, he's a Medal of Honor recipient. He got run out of the party by the left wing and other parts of the Democratic Party. Right? They were not comfortable with Bob Kerry's service. They were not comfortable with Bob with the dirty parts of war
the argument.
and the messy parts of war. No, it's the same argument.
We can pick people.
It's the same.
It was messy. He was not by any means probably qualified to be president because of his military past and some of the controversial things that he had done.
I disagree with that. I know Bob Kerry, and I disagree with that strongly.
Of course you do. But reasonable people can disagree on such things. You couldn't disagree on Kerry Bush. You couldn't disagree on Kerry Bush.
You are approaching this from where you sit, and I respect and understand that. But if you go out to Watkins Glen this weekend, okay, and you ask them John Kerry versus George Bush, you ask them Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump, the Democrats are losing the branding argument. That's my point. The Democrats can say they're strong on defense. They don't say it enough. They don't back it up. They don't elevate people who can make that case. Let's see who's going to push back against Dan Crenshaw today other than me. Let's see who's going to push back against Tucker Carlson other than you. Are they going to have a coordinated effort where they have Colin Powell out there and Admiral Mullen and other people? Or is it going to be Nancy Pelosi?
No, I think you're wrong to say that they're not criticizing. I think that a lot of this messaging stuff I don't agree with you on, but I do have to get to 2 more important issues than this disagreement. One, if we even have time, I wanted to ask you about Afghanistan withdrawal and suicides. Let's just start with suicides, because I saw this statistic the other day. You've been on this issue forever. Nobody has done a better work, I think, than the organization that you founded and were former executive director of. That's why I learned a lot about it. That's why I talked to veterans who were sponsoring, the Clay Hunt bill, which you advocated for. Veteran suicide. This statistic I read last week, I suppose you knew this was inevitable. I guess I never really thought about it, but deaths of Iraq and Afghanistan era veterans have now suicide deaths have exceeded combat deaths in those conflicts.
No doubt. No doubt.
Where are we today on that issue? Are we making progress? What do you want to say about this horrific milestone?
I appreciate you bringing that up, and I always appreciate the battle and the discussion and your focus on these issues. Here's what everybody needs to know. The Vietnam vets will tell you there could be 5-10 times the number of people who died from suicide and from Agent Orange that are names on the wall. This is not new, right? Like, Americans are surprised that more people die from suicide than in combat. We can't even count how many people die by suicide. We still don't even know definitively because they don't have it on death records, and there's not good accounting from the CDC on how people even die from suicide, die by suicide. So this is not surprising. You know, a good friend of mine asked me yesterday, what's the legacy of this war? And I said to him, what's the number one issue for us? And I'm just reading a text I sent to him. And he said, is it burn pits? Is it suicide? I said, it's sadness. And I said, it's feeling like it was all for nothing. And it's going to be really bad when Afghanistan implodes. But if that's too existential, we can talk about burn pits. But that underscores something that impacted almost as many people as Agent Orange, and that we had to fight for, again, like Agent Orange. Like, it took us 20 years. It took them 50 years. And I think it shows how fucked up it all is, that we have to fight for it again, just like the Vietnam vets did. And I think the AUMF is still a big deal because, like, congrats, you know, like, America gave so little of a shit about us that they let 3 presidents abuse the shit out of us and send us all around the world with no oversight for 2 decades. Like, that is the real shit, right? 2 decades, we got sent around the world to die, and Congress didn't really give a fuck enough to even check the money, to check, you know, the power, to check the AUMF. Everybody can argue about how much they love you. But how much do you love us if right now there's a dude on the ground in Syria and America doesn't even know? Because there are probably people on the ground in Syria. And Congress lets that happen. So I think these are the bigger issues that are so relevant, and they impact suicide, burn pits, sexual assault, all the other cascading elements. But the country never gave enough of a shit about us to even care where they were sending us. That's my no shit on today going into the summer, you know, because I think we have to have this reckoning about how many people care and how many people vote, how many people say they love us and how many people do something about it. Because July 4th is coming. You know, save the fireworks and go support the burn pit legislation. To put your flag on the wall, leave it up there, and go pass Gillibrand's Military Justice Improvement Act to stop people from being sexually assaulted in the military. Stop with the bullshit talk. Stop messing around with Dan Crenshaw and focus on the real shit and help us get stuff done. Because we have gotten a lot done this year so far, and there's an opportunity to do much more with Biden guiding us in the right direction and focused on it. I'll give him credit on that. End of rant.
No, it's fine. I would say the left has cared a lot about those things that you said people don't care. I would say the left has cared about it and covered these issues and tried to get, men out of war.
Why are you like a defender of the quote unquote left? Like,
because I'm an educated person.
But like, yeah, but you got to be educated enough to know that like some of your people suck too. Like veterans suck, and I'm a veterans advocate.
Overwhelmingly, they don't. Overwhelmingly, they don't.
But some of them do. Like, you know, there's plenty of veterans that you're going to see that are politicians now that have forgotten their oath and suck. Like, we got to move beyond this. Like, the left is great, the right is bad.
No,
like,
I disagree. I disagree. The anti-war movement is great. It's great.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot. Yeah, that's like saying the pro-war movement is terrible.
It is. Yeah, it is like saying
everybody in all of it is terrible. Like people who thought Afghanistan is a good idea. And I got labeled as pro-war because I said Afghanistan was a good idea, and I got labeled as anti-war because I said Iraq was a stupid idea. So which am I? Am I pro-war or anti-war?
You and I are good friends, and it would be nuanced. I wouldn't label you as either. I wouldn't do that.
But there's a lot of people like us, Pete. There's more people like us that we need to elevate.
If we're going to shorthand the discussion, which we can right now, the anti-war left, if they had listened to the anti-war left, you wouldn't be having to say that we're sad. You wouldn't be. That war that you fought in Iraq was the worst foreign policy disaster in our generation. You know it, and I know it, and so do so many other veterans. And the anti-war left was a massive movement of normal people, not hippies. I was one of them in the streets.
I was a part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's not homogenous. Okay.
No, but it's almost overwhelmingly.
And the people who failed us. Okay, were on all sides. And you find me the champion of the AUMF reform. Who's the liberal lion who is always on AUMF? It's like Vote Vets is out there occasionally on this. Occasionally Buttigieg used to talk about it. Occasionally some members of Congress would talk about it. Like, somebody out there is smart enough listening in your audience. They could do a global search of how many times Democratic presidential candidates for Congress brought up the AUMF. I think Buttigieg brought it up once, and like Tulsi Gabbard used to bring it up. Okay?
It is
maybe
a
that's
fair
the
point.
closest thing.
I will concede for sure that any criticism of that issue is a fair point because it's the constant authorization of never-ending war. I agree. But on the larger issues of the specific giant military interventions, overwhelmingly it's been the moderate Democrats in Congress who have been against the wars.
Wait, you just said moderates. You went
because I'm not. Of course, yes. Right? Because my point is, of course, the far left was, but I'm making the point to you that so was the moderates in Congress saying, and also, more importantly, on the issues that you've taught me about and that your organization is getting the funding. You tell me who was more cooperative on getting the funding to take care of.
But that's because of ideology. Like, liberals are always going to be more loose with funding, and Republicans are always going to be more conservative. But the real question, hold on. The real question is, who's really focused on oversight? Who's really focused on making sure? No, because that's important. And that's where the ultimate progressive, Bernie Sanders, failed. As chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, we had the biggest VA scandal in history, and he was out there apologizing for the VA and arguing with me and others that it wasn't really a problem. It was some kind of right-wing conspiracy, and the VA wasn't having all these issues. Plenty of progressives fell asleep on the watch, including Barack Obama.
Agreed.
Barack Obama's legacy is a VA that could have been turned around that he totally fucked up.
Let me try to minimize it as much as possible, make it as binary as possible, and see if you buy it. And then I'll ask you Afghanistan, and then I'll say goodbye.
Okay.
I'm going to minimize it and make it as binary as possible. You tell me if this is if there's anything.
Which I resist on principle.
Fair enough.
Okay.
But I have to get huge ratings.
You don't. That's why I'm trying to push you, Pete. No. You don't have to. You got a great audience that will stick around for a real debate.
Here it is. Here we go.
Yeah.
Conservative Republicans have been for every military intervention and conflict. They're so wrapped up with money and politics in the military-industrial complex. They support every war and don't support the veterans' health care when they come home. Democrats are generally against these wars and do support the veterans when they come home. I think that binary is fair.
What do you want me to say? What do you want me to say that?
I want you to say that that's generally...
There are plenty of conservatives who are
generally
right-wing conservatives.
We're against the wars for the military.
Who came out against the Iraq War, and they've talked about it endlessly.
They were drummed out of the party.
Hold on. And there's plenty of people like Hillary Clinton that voted for the war and regretted their vote, right? Like, the generalities help no one. Let's talk about a specific member of Congress and their voting record.
You made generalities about Congress and different ideologies.
Let's talk about leadership and priorities, and someone like Schumer who can dictate the priorities for his party, right? And he can say AUMF is number 2, or he can make AUMF number 11, right? And people like... But pick an individual member of Congress, pick Bernie Sanders, and we can explore his voting record over time. Bernie Sanders is a great example. If you were progressive, you couldn't have been happy with hearing him talk about Afghanistan over time, because he started to go way out into moderate land on Afghanistan over time, just like he does on guns, right? There's certain issues where Bernie Sanders you have to look at as an individual case, because most people probably think he's over here on defense all the time, and he's not. Right? Like, sometimes he comes over here and then he goes back because he's a politician. So I think the really constructive conversation is to have about individual policies, people, voting records, issues, and not talking generalities, because that's what Fox does. That's what
but you did.
does.
But you have been. You've been talking to generals. George W. Bush destroyed an entire generation of the military, their families, and a foreign country. Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle Obama, came in and advocated and did everything they could to fund and support the military.
And didn't end the war either. He said he was going to end it, and he didn't end it. He played games with it, too. How many troops are in Iraq right now, Pete?
I don't know. What, 3,000?
3,000. Yeah. 3,000. Yeah. Right? How many Americans do you think know
he was heavily criticized by the right for withdrawing from Iraq.
But they're still there. We had 8 years.
But he did
of
so
Barack
much better.
Obama,
All I'm saying is that progressives are way better for veterans than conservatives.
It's not binary. It's not binary. And I think you have to hold your people accountable. If you're going to say George Bush, I'm not going to be the guy who always says Barack Obama every time you say George Bush. It doesn't get us anywhere. But I think if you want to move these issues forward, you have to call your own out. And there are plenty of people in the Democratic Party who can do better on these issues, who failed all of us. I would say this. Obama's legacy, one of Obama's really terrible legacies, okay? His failure to fix the VA, which could have been the ultimate case for progressivism, right? Fix the VA, show how the VA works. That's how government works. It's the GI Bill, free healthcare for all. That's your case study, okay, on the whole theory of progressivism. They blew that.
No,
okay?
they didn't. Republicans would not let him do it. You know the resistance came from the Republican Senate on that issue. I'm
not even going to entertain the Republicans won't let me do a thing. You have political capital. You choose to spend it where you want. Okay. Leaders make choices based off, limited options. Okay. And I'll go back to it again. All the people who are going to come after me because they hate that I'm not progressive enough or look at the AUMF. How many of you have even heard of the AUMF before we had this conversation? How many of you have ever read about it? And if you haven't, that's my homework for you. Read about the AUMF. Ask every progressive you care about to push for this so that if you really care about never-ending wars and stopping sending people all around the world, that's your bullseye. That's the place to focus. Because right now, 3 presidents have had carte blanche to send people wherever the fuck they want, including Syria over the weekend.
The anti-war left knows so much more about the AUMF than anybody in the middle or on the right. Always have.
You're smarter than a statement like that, Pete. I love you too much to let you make blanket statements.
Find me all the books and all the columns. Make the case with anybody you want. There are those, what are they, libertarians, your Rand Pauls, and a couple of others, but that's generally all there is. The anti-war left have always been critical of the AUMF before anybody on the right ever was. I think that's a profoundly easy case to make, but I will concede as always to you, sir, if I am wrong on that and anything else. And you should know, a lot of people listen to this podcast when we argue agree with you and not me, which is upsetting.
Well, it's not about agreement. Here's my thing, and this is no
it's
shit.
about learning different points of view.
I want to add light to contrast to heat. Yep. You and I get into it. We love each other. I learn from you. You learn from me, and hopefully everybody learned a little bit of something, more than they knew 20 minutes ago. That's what I think we need more of. So I appreciate you doing that, and I hope everyone this 4th of July coming up learn about the AUMF, learn about burn pits, learn about the fact that tens of thousands of troops are being sexually assaulted in our military. If you care about our national defense, help them stop being sexually assaulted, right? That's happening. And those are things hopefully we can all agree on. Focus on that instead of what Matt Gaetz said while we were on the air.
And let's never
Tucker Carlson.
And let's never, ever again send our American men and women volunteers into conflicts they shouldn't be in and that they cannot win.
And cargo shorts for everybody.
No, I disagree. You and I have moved on. We've moved on. Paul Rieckhoff, thank you very much.
My friend, I appreciate you. Happy summer to your amazing audience.
We'll talk
Thank
soon.
you all for all the support.
There you go, Paul Rieckhoff, everybody. We got him on just about everything, from cargo shorts to veterans issues to parenting to auto racing to war and politics. I hope you enjoyed that. I would love to know what you thought about our argument segment and anything else about this interview or anything else I'm doing here on the podcast. Thank you so much for your support. Doing this daily show I love it. I love doing it, but it's super challenging each and every day. It takes a lot of time to book it and produce it, host it, edit it, and post it as I do late every night. So I really hope that you'll sign up for a subscription. If you haven't already, consider upping your subscription if you can. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your support. Starting to get some good ad sponsors now, slowly growing, taking a few steps forward and a step back, but the YouTube page is up now, youtube.com/standup. Please go subscribe to that. And that is all I've got for you today. I will see you on the Discord platform if you're a stand-up community member, and Thursday at 8 p.m. East. Also, July 26th, I'll be with J.L. Covan in Boston. Get tickets for that. I'll put a link in the show notes as well. And now, July 1st, you can get this song, Stand Up, by singer-songwriter, Grammy Award winner, and a very valued, respected member of our community. Take it away, John Carroll.
Stand up, stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand for your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.